Here's what I can promise you. If you spend this Christmas season focused on those things that exist in your life, you will have a very Merry Christmas. I guarantee it. We just wanted to punctuate that prayer in case to make sure you felt it this morning. Well, good morning. Welcome to the Grove. If you'll turn to somebody and say, peace be with you. Yeah, you love this. Turn to the other side and say, peace be with you. Yes. Well, we are in the season of Advent. Advent is just this time of waiting. What we are waiting for is to celebrate the coming of Christ, knowing that there will be another coming of Christ one day in the future. And so we're in this in between. I kind of call it the messy middle, which is where I feel like we spend most of our lives, which is why we are calling this series through Advent a very Merry Christmas. And that's also why the Christmas tree is knocked over and lights are broken, because it kind of reflects the tension that we're all living in this messy middle. I don't know how your Advent season has started. Maybe you're on kind of the upswing and you're like, all right, this is the year that we've got it all together. Maybe you are at the other end of the continuum and you're realizing that, oh, I haven't even thought about Christmas cards and sending those out, and I haven't purchased any gifts or thought about gifts, and you're feeling very behind this season. I was decided to put Christmas lights on our house yesterday, and so I wake up and I pull all the stuff out, and then it immediately starts raining. And I know that I've got a deadline because my wife is traveling this weekend and she'll be home around noon today. And so I know that I have this window of time that I have to get the lights on the house. And so I'm mumbling and grumbling, and the lights are it never works the way that you want it to, right? There's something that's always, at least for me, never quite right about the home projects that I do. Thankfully, I live close to Lowe's down the street, and anything that I do related to the house, I have to go to Lowe's 3 times. I don't know why. I get 90% of the way there the first time, realize I'm missing something, so then I have to go to Lowe's. And then I come back and I got what I think I needed, and then I begin to put the lights on and the extra extension cords that I bought and the timer. Come to find out that the lights that I bought didn't work, and there was a hole in one of the extension cords. I didn't even know extension cords could get holes in them. So then I got to go back to Lowe's and have a conversation with the customer service people to exchange, right? Like, it never just goes, it's never easy. And so maybe your Advent season has started a little like mine, where you just can't get the momentum that you want. And then we gather on Sunday mornings and then we sing peace on the earth, goodwill to men. And you're like, yeah, right, that would be nice. Because there's nothing that feels peaceful about this season. In fact, last week, I don't know if you're here, but one of you wrote on your prayer request. We're not in the habit of sharing prayer requests publicly like this, so even though we've just asked you to fill that out, just know that we're not going to name names. One of you wrote, prayers for peace during the Christmas chaos. Prayers for peace during the Christmas chaos. And I thought, well, that's it. Like, this is what this whole month is about, is how do we navigate all of the chaotic elements, all of the rushing and busy and bustle. How do we find peace in the midst of all of this? Now, one of the problems I think that we have with locating peace in the midst of this Christmas chaos is our understanding of what peace is, right? We sing these words, we say the word peace, and if I did a kind of informal poll of you this morning, and I said, what is peace? Probably the most common answer would be some version of the absence of conflict, right? We kind of juxtapose peace and conflict, peace and war as 2 ends of the continuum. And then we read things like this passage from Isaiah that says this. This is from Isaiah 2. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. Many peoples will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths. He will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many people. We sang this a second ago. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. This is our definition oftentimes of peace. And peace certainly includes the absence of war, the absence of, conflict between nations or parties or people. But it's more than that, because if it's just conflict and it's just the absence of war, then we can have things like this statue that resides outside of the United Nations building. This is a statue of this phrase, beating their swords into plowshares. Well, we can outsource this to local government, right? If peace is just, I almost made a comment about that, and I just decided that in the best interest of this morning, I'm not going to take a detour and comment on outsourcing things to local government. But we see this, and we say, this is achievable, right? Maybe one day we can hope for this future reality where there's no more conflict. That's a lovely thought. It just doesn't seem that relevant for us. Maybe I'll be kinder to my kids. Maybe I won't bicker with my spouse. Maybe during the holidays I'll be nicer to my in-laws or say a kind word to my brother-in-law, even though he voted the exact opposite way that I did, but I'm gonna try to achieve this peace in my life and in my family. I think the reason that we struggle to acquire peace in this way is because of the one-dimensional nature that we think about it. Yes, peace means the absence of conflict, but it's far deeper, especially the way that the Bible uses the word peace. In Hebrew, it's that word shalom. Maybe you've heard somebody say that before. Shalom. It's often used as a greeting, an exchange, kind of like peace be with you. It's the same phrase, but when you unpack what that word shalom means, there's a couple of versions of definitions, but they all point to the same thing. They all point to this idea of wholeness. They point to this idea of restoration, of making things full and complete again. Now, what it indicates, though, is complex systems that have lots of parts that may be fractured or broken that are then brought back together again. This is the idea of the word shalom. It's a restoring of this fractured, broken system, these scattered, disparate pieces, all being made new. So, ancient context, if my sheep gets out and runs through your garden, restoring peace, or peace is restoring your garden back to its original state. If your oxen knocks down my fencing and my sheep run away, restoration is making good, bringing back wholeness to all of my sheep and my fencing, right? You can see how this would play out in an ancient context. If that's the definition of peace, if it's restoring wholeness and bringing all of the pieces back together, then it makes sense the way that the Bible describes the antithesis of peace, which isn't conflict. The antithesis of peace in Scripture is anxiety. Because anxiety in the Greek means a scattering of pieces. Think about the language that Jesus uses, the wordplay that he makes in that story that maybe you've heard about when Mary and Martha are gathered in Jesus together. Jesus is in their home, and Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet, and Martha is running around making all of the preparations in the house and doing all of the tasks and very, very, very busy. Jesus says to her, "Martha, Martha, you were distracted by many things. You were anxious about many things." It's this wordplay. There are all of these pieces that you are spending your time trying to bring and gather together. This is what anxiety means. Think about the way that this plays out in your life. If you're prone to anxiety around your family, you're constantly thinking about all the little pieces and things that you have to do in your life to make sure all of the people in your life are okay. There's more to do than you can ever get done. There's a constant list, all of these things that you have to touch and adjust and think about and worry about. This begins to produce anxiety in us. Just like Martha in Scripture, Jesus says, you're distracted, you're worried, you're anxious about many things. Now, I think eventually we can get to the place where peace is the absence of conflict and war in the world. But I think the place that it has to start is with us. Because there will never be any absence of conflict in the world if we live lives that are distracted and scattered and chasing after all of the pieces. If we live lives of anxiety and worry. I think this is probably one of the chief reasons that we describe this season as Christmas chaos. Because different than maybe other seasons and times of the year, the list of all of the pieces that we have to pursue and bring together to make sure that we all have a very Merry Christmas is longer than any other time of the year. How many of you, your to-do list just tripled or quadrupled? How many of you, all of a sudden, there are all of these extra boxes in your entryway from all of the extra ordering that you're doing online, right? It's like when you were a kid, you have this like fort made of all these boxes you've got like navigate your way through. Because this time of year, there's all these extra things to attend to. There's all these extra responsibilities. There's all these extra commitments. And it's hard to say no because you want to be there at all the places because you care about these people. And so now you're feeling pulled in all of these different directions. And it starts to produce anxiety. And me just reminding you of it this morning is probably making you think about all of the things that you got to do as soon as you leave this place, which is why some of you aren't making eye contact and you're jotting down a list of all of the things that you got to do, right? This can't be how it's supposed to be. This can't be the life that God intends for us. I think one of the issues is similar to Martha. It's our focus. Because I think our life follows what we focus on. Parents, this is why you tell your children about the music they listen to and the friends that they hang out with and the TV shows that they watch, right? Because we see that our life follows the things that we focus on. The same is true with all of these worries, with all of these pieces that we're in pursuit of. There is a concept in photography and film called forced perspective. And what forced perspective does is it is an optical illusion and a manipulation to the viewer based on where different objects are in relationship to the lens of the camera. So, if the camera is here and you put something really close to the camera and then something much further away from the camera, it makes the thing that's closer to the camera look much larger than in reality to the thing that's further away from the camera. Does this start to make sense? Might be easier if I show you. This is an example of forced perspective, right? You've probably taken one of these photos. If you've been to Italy and you've been to Pisa, you have taken one of these photos, right? You've got the foot on it or you're leaning against it, right? We do this because it's funny, it's interesting. Here's another one, right? I spent hours trying to find photos to illustrate forced perspective just because I think they're so fascinating and clever. Here's another one. Yeah, that's a good one, right? Some of you are getting ideas for next year's holiday card, right, as we're going through this. One more, right? Clearly, what we're seeing isn't a true picture of reality. What we're seeing is an optical illusion. Because what is closer to the camera, what is more in focus, appears larger than in reality. This is what happens when we worry. This is what happens with our anxiety. We focus on all of the pieces, and they become so much larger in perspective than reality in our life. Which is why you have moments where you're so consumed, or you see someone else so consumed with the details. And you're like, that's not a big deal. We have expressions for this. Missing the forest for the trees, right? Same idea. You've lost yourself in all of the little pieces. This is why Paul writes to the Philippians, and he gives them instruction around anxiety and worry. He says this in Philippians 4. He says this in Philippians 4. Do not be anxious about anything, about whether your slides come up when you cue them or not. Nothing should provoke anxiety inside of you. Don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your heart and your minds in Christ Jesus. This is what he says. Do not be anxious. Nope, we'll stay on that slide. Do not be anxious about anything. Now, there are some immediate and obvious objections to this. Oh, so you're just saying ignore reality. Ignore the difficult circumstances I'm in. Ignore my health diagnosis. Ignore our finances. Ignore my relationship troubles. No, that's not what Paul is saying here. He's not saying it doesn't matter what's happening to you. He just says, don't be anxious about any of this. Don't spend your time worrying about, consumed with, your thoughts about what may or may not happen to you. Right? At the core of anxiety is uncertainty. There's a gap between what we know, what we're experiencing, and what may or may not happen in the future. This is what Paul's speaking into. Our fixation, our preoccupation with the uncertainty that exists in our life. This is how that illustration of forced perception makes sense. We are so focused on the uncertainty in our life that it becomes our dominant reality, at the expense of and losing sight of everything else in our life. Paul doesn't say, just pretend like everything's okay and it'll be okay. It's not what he says. He says, don't be anxious. Don't be so consumed with uncertainty in your life, of whatever shape or size. Instead, submit your request to God. Acknowledge it. It's okay to name the parts of your life that you want to be different. It's okay to point out to God all of the places that feel imperfect or that feel against your preferences, right? It doesn't even have to be a moral issue or a spiritual issue. You can just be like, God, I don't really want to go to this party next week that so-and-so is going to be at. Could you create a way for me to miss this party, right? It can be something simple like that. It's okay to acknowledge reality, to acknowledge the ways that we want our life to look different in the future. It's okay to name the uncertainty. God, I don't know what's going to happen with fill in the blank. I'm really fixated on this. This has my attention. I'm consumed with this. It's okay to give all of that to God, according to Paul. He says, just do it with a sense of perspective. Do it with gratitude, acknowledging that, God, if it's in your will, I would love for this to play out this way. God, if it's in your will, I would love to get an end-of-year bonus. And if not, I accept that I'm not in control, and I accept that I'm going to be okay, even if this doesn't happen the way that I want it to. And that's a hard jump for us sometimes. It's a hard jump for us to believe that if we're not in control, we're going to be okay. Because let's be honest, we're all really capable people here. Part of the reason that our lives look the way they do in the positive is because of all of the control that we've exerted on our life thus far. But what got you here won't keep you here. And what Paul is saying is if you want a life of peace, you have to acknowledge that you're not in control of all of the things that may or may not happen. All of the pieces, you can't control all of those pieces. So give them over to God and acknowledge that God is the ultimate reality. God is the thing that should be closer to us in our perspective than all of the uncertainty that we face in life. He goes on. This is what Paul says. He says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Gives us this whole list of virtues, of categories to focus on. He's not saying ignore the reality of your life. What he's saying is shift the perspective on what you're focusing on. It is really hard to be anxious when you're consumed with gratitude. It is really hard to be anxious when you're focused on generosity. It is really hard to be critical when you're focused on all of the ways that you can be kind to the people in your life. When you shift the perspective, those things become larger to you. This is what Paul is trying to teach us to do. He says, think about these things. Now, this isn't just whatever's true, good, I don't know. That word, think about, is like meditate on, ruminate on, fixate on these things. This is kind of an evaluation and inventory of our thought patterns. What are you daydreaming about? What are your nightmares about? Where does your mind go in stillness? Where does it wander to? If you try to pray to God, where are all of the lists of things that aren't the way that you want them to be or that you need to attend to? What is all of that? Monitor and pay attention to your thought patterns. And Paul's saying, and then shift them to this list. True, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, or praiseworthy. Here's what I can promise you. If you spend this Christmas season focused on those things that exist in your life, you will have a very Merry Christmas. I guarantee it. But if you allow yourself to fixate on and to focus on all of the ways that your life is not exactly as you want it, all of the things that feel uncertain and beyond your reach of control, it will be a tough season that you will be glad to have made it through. You'll come to the other side of it and be like, whew, endured that. That shouldn't be the way that we navigate the Advent season. It's a season of expectation of what is to come. But it's not just focused in the future. You can have peace now. This is the promise that Paul gives us. He says all of these things, and this is what he says at the end. And the God of peace will be with you. Not, and the God of peace will be with you one day. The God of peace will be with you today, now, when you shift your focus from all of the uncertainty in life to the goodness, to the places that God is active and at work. If we wait for the absence of conflict to trust that we'll have peace, if we wait for all of the pieces in our life to fall into place, we will spend the rest of our lives waiting for peace. Paul extends the invitation for us to have it today. This peace that is available to us is found when we trust our lives and our future, all of the uncertainty that we carry, when we trust that to God. When we say, God, you know what? I don't have it all figured out. I don't have it all together, and it's not all the way that I want it to be. But I trust your goodness that however it plays out, that God, you're present in it, that you're working in it. Now, I know that sometimes this feels easier said than done. This is not just this kind of Pollyanna, naive, like happy-go-lucky thinking that is ignorant to the realities around us. There are parts of our lives that are really hard and painful right now. Challenges with health, relationship struggles, issues and uncertainty around our employment or our personal finances, ways that we just feel maybe lonely or just sad this season. All of that's real. And this isn't one of those magic wand sermons where the answer is Jesus and then everything's okay. It's not what we're talking about. It's about focusing on the constant reality that is God. That trusting in God, things will eventually one day be okay, even if they don't feel okay now. It's knowing that our circumstances don't have to determine our inner peace. The uncertainty in our life doesn't have to have the final say on the contentment we have right now in this life. I love what 17th century Scottish archbishop and theologian Robert Leighton says about peace. He says, all the peace and favor of the world cannot calm a troubled heart. Let me start that over, make sure you heard it. All of the peace and favor of the world cannot calm a troubled heart. Circumstances being exactly what you want them to be. The absence of any uncertainty in your life. Global peace cannot calm a troubled heart. But where this peace is, which Christ gives, all the trouble and disquiet of the world cannot disturb it. There's a peace that we have access to today, friends, that is separated from all of the places in our life that don't feel very merry and bright. And it's found in the person of Christ. So this holiday season, what would it look like to begin to draw closer to him? Through a time of quiet prayer, through silence, through solitude, through singing of hymns, whatever it may be for you. What is a way that you can draw closer to Christ? To focus on his presence in your life now, so that you can be filled with peace during this holiday season. We don't have to wait on the world. It can start with us today. Friends, let's pray. Gracious God, Prince of Peace, come and fill us with your Spirit. Let us focus on you. Let us gain perspective on you as our ultimate source of reality, so that you can fill us with your peace. God, it's not something that we acquire on our own, but something that comes as a gift from you. And so we ask for it this morning. Help us to focus on you, to draw closer to you, so that we can receive the peace that you want for all of us.